Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
The single best idea. We've been doing this a few years, and it's now getting the weirdness meter, the surveillance weirdness meter is off the chart. And I don't mean to be inflammatory, and I'm not predicting anything about equities, bonds, currencies, or commodities, but the uncertainty out there. I want to go through this. I think it's so important. There are three words in economics: risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. Let me start with ambiguity, which is the least important. Douglas North, Nobel Prize winner, Washington University of St. Louis. Ambiguity means a couple different things. And it's sort of like in microeconomics where something can happen and it cuts either way, and it's ambiguous which way it cuts, whatever chart you're looking at or thought you're looking at, frankly, algebraic equation. But also ambiguity around institutions. And it's just an uncertain feel because of the ambiguous nature of institutions. And then there's risk, which is a measurable doubt, a measurable probability, a measurable uncertainty. And now everybody's tossing around the word uncertainty. I mean, I'm hearing it about every 7 minutes on the show. We get a tip jar we have at the show every time someone mentions uncertainty. That's the unmeasurable. And on this Monday, the unmeasurable, particularly off tariff wonderment of the Trump administration, is absolutely, I've never seen it like this. You need to get a view of the American economy. We do that with Kathy Bostjancic of Nationwide.
It's a good point that there's certainly dichotomy across the U.S. economy, and depending where you are, particularly on the income spectrum, you're feeling tougher times than others. I would say, though, even for lower income, lower middle income, they're struggling, but it's not a recession. The unemployment rate is still quite low, although, that said, if we adjust for the drop in the participation rate, the unemployment rate would have been 4.7 as on Friday instead of 4.1. What we have seen is a participation rate drop quite sharply the last 2 months, and it's because discouraged workers. So the discouraged worker increase in June was a record monthly increase going back to, I think it's 1995.
That's the clearest explanation I've heard of this. David Rosenberg with a brilliant note out of Toronto, Friday or Saturday, I can't remember when. I really want to emphasize that a lot of people I respect are saying, okay, it was a really pretty good jobs report, but it wasn't. And there it is from Kathy Bostjancic. When you take the goofy math of unemployment and labor, which Mike McKee gets and I don't, the answer is the unemployment rate would have been 4.7% given labor force participation. Really something to think about is Chairman Powell goes to a July Fed meeting. On the stock market and the ability to be in the market, we got a briefing from Lori Calvasina, RBC Capital Markets.
If I think back to my most recent trip to Canada, seeing investors up there, it was a very different trip than what I had back in December and what I had back in February, when I would say we would go into meetings and the conversations were pretty much all about tariffs. When you talk to a lot of global investors in Canada who are always sort of thinking about countries and comparing them. And, we heard plenty of conversation about tariffs on this last trip, but there was also a lot of emphasis on AI and productivity in the U.S. And people were actually starting to talk about some non-tariff related things. And I know that sounds a little bit shocking. But I would say it was not as negative a vibe as what I had seen earlier in the year or late last year.
Lori Calvasina, RBC Capital Markets, and of course that dovetails into a fascinating earnings season. Paul said it best, I think. Paul Sweeney said, but it's also about the guidance that will be there. Will we see guidance given all the uncertainty that's out there? We'll try to guide you on economics, finance, investment, and international relations through the week. Across the nation, on Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube podcasts. This is Single Best Idea.